Hello, everyone. This is Brian Smith, and I wanted to do a little bit of a flashback on one of the prospects that, quite honestly, finalized it for me in becoming a recruiting fan, and that would be Randy Moss. I was already a recruiting junkie following it. I bought all kinds of magazines, Super Prep and Tom Lemmings, and I read anything I could, USA Today, about recruiting. This is before the internet. And then about the time Randy was going to be a senior in high school is when the internet came about. So a little bit of that, but it really wasn't until 97, 98 the internet really got going and there was no huddle or anything else. So this is an anecdote from different pieces, myself included, on what happened with his recruitment, things that happened behind the scenes. Some of it may or may not be true. Again, I'm passing along some of this. I'm giving some of my own information as well, what I learned from different people, and just my own evaluation of what I had seen. So, towards the end of this, I'm going to put up on the screen a little bit of Marshall footage. If you followed football at all, signed with Notre Dame, went to Florida State, kicked out, end up at Marshall, goes to the draft. I mean, it's a really weird 3 years for him. But this is the beginning part to the end, and just my thoughts on it overall. I'll give my overall assessment of him at the end. But with this, in the 94, which would have been his senior year season, he didn't graduate till 95. Everybody knew that he was a top 10 player in the country. When I saw him on the list of all these kids, I'm like, West Virginia? Who the hell's a top 10 player out of West Virginia? Because honestly, they usually just have a couple of kids that are, really good, let alone like a Power Five. West Virginia at that time had a pretty good football program, but they did most of their recruiting in New Jersey, Maryland, Virginia, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. I mean, it's just the way it is. That state is not very geared towards having a lot of athletes. So it was probably hard for anybody to grade him. But everybody had him a top player. And I don't remember what Lemming had him, but I know I read something recently. Somebody asked Tom Lemming, like, who's the best player you ever saw? He said Moss. That's one of the things. Maybe that was just off the cuff, and that's just who we thought of at the time. I don't know. But I just remember when he signed with Notre Dame, it was like the day after signing day. It was a weird deal because back then everybody did the exact same thing. Like he announced on signing day, and he announced all these kids. Randy did it the next day, which was kind of odd anyway. But I saw a few clips of him, and it was almost expected. It was weird because the first time I saw them, I remember thinking to myself, what was it I just watched? Keep in mind, he was listed at 6'5", 185 pounds, which when I first saw the size and like he was like listed with 4.3 speed and all this, I'm like, yeah, BS. West Virginia kid listed with that. Then I watched the video and it was bizarre. But then I remember, hey, he's in West Virginia. I didn't know how to grade him. And I wasn't that I was an Italian evaluator at that point. I didn't even work for Rivals or anybody yet. But I scouted as much as I could just out of fun before I got into the business. And this is how I got started. Watching as much as I could, talking to people, reading articles, going to different events, etc. I wish I could have seen him live in high school, but I did not. But what I remember is like the second time I watched him, I focused on his stride. If you want to watch Randy, even when he's with the Vikings or anybody else, watch his stride. Once he hits quote unquote top gear, the distance between step A and step B is not even normal by National Football League standards. He's just very tall, but he was also extremely flexible. And that's why the film that I saw in high school was ridiculous. There was no way to compare him to anybody else. There wasn't anything else like him. The only other player, I guess, that somebody might have compared him to back in the day, they probably did, for some older fans, Harold Carmichael, if I remember right. Eagles wide receiver, he's like 6'7" or something. He could really run. There are a few guys like that, but Randy's hand-eye coordination and his determination, et cetera, made him different. So anyway, he ends up being like the number one player, and I was still skeptical because he played in West Virginia. It was just hard to understand how good he was. Signs with Notre Dame, and he was a Notre Dame fan. He admitted that afterwards and all that. I heard all kinds of stories about why he didn't end up at Notre Dame. Heard the application was done in different types of handwriting, some different types of ink, all incomplete, you name it. I've heard it all. If there's that many different stories, some of it's probably true. So then, of course, the whole incident, he got in trouble. Notre Dame just wasn't a fit. Randy probably wasn't ready for college in general. He didn't have a very good upbringing, unstable situation at home, all of that. He had a kid already. It was just a lot of bad things. Notre Dame doesn't necessarily fit that, and quite honestly, a lot of schools don't. But he kept smoking weed, gets thrown out of Florida State, where this is the most interesting part to me of the story. If you remember back, Florida State mid-90s unquestionably was the top 4 team in college football every year. Even if you hated their guts, you didn't rank them in the top 4, you're a moron. You need to get out of the room. Danny Cannell said that Randy was the best receiver out on the field. They were redshirted him. He wasn't allowed to play. And he kept going to Bowden trying to get him to put him on the field because he's like, he's the best guy here. You can like Danny, not like Danny, whatever. He was a pretty darn good quarterback. Ended up playing in the NFL for a little while for the Giants. If Danny says that, there's a reason. I mean, FSU in 95 was ridiculous. And he was saying he was the best guy on the field. Like, I don't know. I don't remember the exact quote. Maybe he meant just receiver. But even if he meant just receiver, Florida State at wide receiver every year was really good. They were top 10 in the country at receiver every year. And Randy gets in trouble smoking weed, and he gets booted. Well, at that point, his options are getting pretty freaking limited. He was very fortunate to be from West Virginia at that point. Why? Yeah, well, if he transfers, and he went to Tennessee or whatever, and let's be honest, because of how good he was, anybody that had taken him, they can lie all they want now. They'd have taken him because he, whether or not he was an idiot at the time, they were going to take him. But he wanted to play right away. Well, 1AA didn't have the same transfer rules that 1A did, which is now FBS. He went back home to Marshall. They were 1AA. And there's a two-prong to that. Number one, he could transfer right in. And the year after he got there, they went to D1, if I remember right, 97. So his first year at Marshall, I knew he was going to kill it because their schedule was garbage. And he went out and did what he did. But I just remember watching him run by guys in college that were, they were still college football players. That put the perspective that I had into reality a little bit. But about 2 years ago, it came back. Sometimes you just run into people. All right, I'm at a camp in Orlando, Florida. Orlando's loaded. It's not any newsflash, but there's a kid there, plays at a Popco. Remember Lowood who played at Notre Dame at the same high school. Well, this kid's a really good player, but his dad played with Randy at Marshall. And he talked to me before the event got started. And I don't remember how I kicked it off, but I said something about, you play with Randy, blah, 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 something. And he gave me one of the greatest stories that I've ever heard about Randy Moss. That's saying something. He told me that when Randy got there, again, they were 1AA at the time at Marshall. A lot of the guys didn't like the hype he was getting and all that. And eventually, the first day of ball comes. He's no different than us. That's what he said that some of the defensive players and all this were talking about. Well, the following happened. Took a quick slant, first play of practice, scored. Had a reverse, scored. And then there was another third play, scored. Like the first 3 times Randy touched the ball, going all out, he scored. Nobody said crap after that. Rest kind of history. He's just faster than everybody. He's bigger than everybody, more determined than everybody, twitchier than everybody. He was an A-plus athlete. And you can make the argument he was the best athlete in the country at that time, regardless of sport. So, and again, coming out of high school, he was a different dude. All state basketball, like football, track. He ran 21-15 his sophomore year at Marshall in the 200. Baseball, if I remember right, he was all state in baseball in West Virginia. He only played like 1 or 2 years, but he was a center fielder. Can you imagine somebody that fast at 6'5" playing center field if he'd have focused on baseball? So anyway, I'm going to read off a few stats here about Moss. And I know it was not SEC West or whatever, but these are still impressive stats. So when you think of Randy, think about what you have to do when everybody in the stadium, regardless of level, knows you're going to get the football. It's not easy to punch out big play after big play, but this is stat lines from first. I'll do 96 and then 97. These are the 2 years he played at Marshall. 96, 78 receptions in 15 ball games, 1,709 yards, 21.9 average. That's solid. 28 touchdowns through the year. And he also was an impactful guy in kick returns. He had over 600 yards of kickoff returns and averaged 34 yards, had an 88-yard return. Somebody must have bumped him out right before the goal line. It says he didn't score. That's surprising. The next year, in only 13 games, he had 96 catches, 1,820 yards. He dipped in average, poor Randy. He averaged 19 yards flat in the receiving average category, had 26 touchdowns, also had a rushing touchdown, and 18.6 yards on his returns, and was also a pretty good punt return guy, 10.8 yards per return. So I'm gonna share my screen here in just a moment, and I'm gonna talk over it while I got some film up of him, and I'll kind of go over some other things, thoughts about him, compare him to some other guys. But this is a very unique athlete, and it's when I go out and scout kids here in Florida or anywhere else. Ironically, Randy trained in Florida for a long time. This is the guy I compare him to, and this guy and this guy and this guy. I've never had anybody like him. Number one, because he's 6'5". Never seen a guy like this that was as twitchy as Randy at 6'5". That's number one. Long kids can't turn and move suddenly like a 6-foot kid, like a 5'7" kid, or anywhere in between. But they got reach. It's the conundrum coaches are trying to figure out. How flexible can this kid be? Can we get him more flexible? He's 6'3", blah, blah, blah. These are the conundrums. Randy was straight up that guy in high school at 6'5", and from what I'm told, he didn't even stretch very often. I was told once that he ran a 4.4 in jeans. Again, I don't know if that's true, but if it's even close, that's not normal. So especially for a 6'5" guy. So I'm gonna share my screen here, and I put the volume. I put the volume on nothing, so I can talk over it. But just note that, like, when he runs by guys, it is not normal. It is not normal at all. And it's just over and over that it was really easy for him to do it. I'm not really sure that it was fair for him to be playing in the MAC. Like, this is the game. I was at this game. This is the Ball State game. The film footage is obviously terrible, but it is what it is. We'll play action. Throwing it up to Randy. Well, that's terrible footage. That figures it's in the MAC, but Randy scores again. Yeah, I remember that game because there were more people there rooting for Marshall than there was for Ball State. As sad as that is, but Ball State football has never been exactly dominant. Chad Pennington was the quarterback for Marshall then. That's not very easy. Okay, you're not going to bump him, and you're going to put a short corner on him one-on-one. That is absolutely just ridiculous. That didn't even look like Randy was trying. So anyway, when I saw Randy in person, here are a couple of things that I picked up when I watched him at Marshall. There was a punt return that he didn't score on, but I remember it was actually a very good punt. And there was a guy that thought he was going to take Randy's head off. It was right in front of me. I had pretty good seats. It's down low. And I just remember Randy didn't act like any different on that punt than anything else. The guy was a few feet away. As soon as he touched the ball, he spun out of it like a 5'8" kid would, like somebody like Barry Sanders would. And it wasn't even competitive. He just made him look dumb. And that to me was the ultimate, because punt return, again, you got to be twitchy more than fast to be good at it. How many 6'5" punt returners do you know? I'm sure I've seen somebody else do it, but I don't remember who that might be. And I highly doubt they were as skilled as Randy Moss. Matter of fact, I know that he's the most talented 6'5" receiver that's ever played the game. Great catch there. Chad Pennington was really on the mark on this game, obviously. He could put the ball where he needed to. So hats off to him. He knew the advantages he had with his players, and he benefited them and himself by utilizing those skills to recognize. So Chad had a pretty underrated pro career too, obviously. Last thing I'm going to say about Moss before I wrap this up is the following. When you think about his career, what separated him besides the physical traits? If you remember back to his time in the NFL and all that stuff, he had different things going on. People bitched and moaned about his attitude, this and that. But it wasn't until they did that show on ESPN, 30 for 30, and this is just incredible. They played Montana in the finals one year. Might have been this season after this game. And I can't remember. Maybe it would have been the year before. It would have been after his sophomore year. And the game wasn't until like noon. And one of the coaches gets there early, and he sees Randy dressed out downstairs, standing out looking at the field. He's like, Randy, what are you doing? And he's like, I hate Montana. I mean, Randy couldn't pick out Montana on the map like most kids from the East Coast couldn't either. How in the hell would Randy know anything about Montana? But he was just ready to go. And that was his mentality throughout his career and what I heard about him overall many different times. So it's just interesting to me that a guy that had that much skill also had that much determination. It wasn't one or the other. They were matched with each other. And that's why, to me, and this is my final point, he is the best prospect that I've ever seen. It's just ironic that the first time that I'd seen him, and I was trying to learn how to be a scout. There's a lot of things that go into it. I didn't even know what the hell I'd see. Like the first time through watching his video, it was just bizarre because guys that run that fast, usually there's more steps. It didn't look like it was real. It was like a video game. But when you take those video game skills and you pressure yourself to think, okay, well, what if he played this spot or he did this or he had this quarterback? You can look at him any ways you want. He was faster than anybody. He had the twitchiness that you can't teach, like that punt return I was talking about in the Marshall game against Ball State. I'll never forget that. Then you bring in the point about the Montana comment. That's insane. Like he's out there allegedly, based on that, like 4 hours before the kickoff, dressed out. Hell, there was nobody at the stadium. I don't even know how the hell he got in the locker room. But Randy Moss is the most unique prospect that I've ever seen. And I guess I'll add this little snippet. If I'm going to see somebody that matches him, number one, they got to have the physical traits because nobody wants to hear this. We grade more than anything else on your upside physically. Okay, it doesn't matter what network, Rivals, 247, On3, ESPN. What is the highest ceiling this young man could hit? Randy Moss is a 10. It's not. He sets the standard so high that I don't even think, like Jeremiah Smith is my favorite player in the class of 24. He's at Chaminade Madonna down in the Fort Lauderdale area. And as good as Jeremiah is and as determined as he is, he's still not 6'5", and he's still not 4'3". And I think Jeremiah is the best player in the country. Randy is that rare. The only thing that I'm disappointed about with his career is just where he was from. If he would have played at a school down in Fort Lauderdale, Broward County, which is about as good an area as there is in the country, we would have had a better idea what he could have done long term because he would have went up against more players throughout high school. But that's one of the reasons it was so wild, because he was from West Virginia. It made the story cool. So anyway, Randy Moss, to me, is the enigma. He is the unicorn. He is the white horse. He is all the things that the kids are reaching for to get to. But they can only reach so much because, again, he's 6'5". But if you want to talk about something you can match, if you're a kid watching this, it's his determination. He was as gifted as anybody, and he went out and did extra things with workouts. Like he worked out with Chris Carter, who had nowhere near as much raw tools. And Chris talked about this numerous times on the NFL Network or whatever, ESPN, etc. There will never be another Randy Moss. And he was just talking about the physical. Well, Randy used to go train with Chris down in South Florida. That's where that got started. So kids can do that. Like he's a guy that you weren't going to outwork him either, and he was already a hell of a lot better than you. So something to think about. One of the truly great football players and great athletes in my lifetime, Randy Moss, I owe a big thanks to because he got me interested in looking at kids from a different light. Without him, I don't know if I ever would have wanted to go down this path. And it's amazing what he did in the NFL and all that stuff too. But that's a time that I'll break down some Vikings footage or something else. But man, he was just a great player. So anyway, please like this podcast. please hit that notification bell and please share it. And if anything else that you can think of you want to add, or a story about Randy, comment. There's probably not much I haven't heard about him, but I'm curious to see what other people know. Maybe somebody that's a Patriots fan, a Raiders fan, a Vikings fan, has a backstory. This is more about human interest than it is Randy as a football player. So understand that I know that I just have one side of what I've heard from some people, my own personal anecdote from when I saw him that Ball State game that I put on the screen. But please share all those things, and just remember just how great a player he was. And there's probably not going to be too many more like him.